out your notebook. There's more.
Welcome to CN Live, Season 8, Episode 4, Free Speech in the Dock. I'm Kathy Vaughan.
And I'm Joe Loria.
The Australian Parliament has adopted a potentially nation-altering hate crimes bill that allows an intelligence agency and the government to collaborate in virtual secrecy to list hate groups whose members and supporters could then be imprisoned. The law could allow peaceful organisations protesting against Israel to be listed as hate groups in a hidden process between ASIO, the Australian Intelligence Security Organisation, which is the nation's domestic intelligence agency, similar to the F.B.I, and the Home Affairs Minister. There is no provision for due process, and oversight of the listing procedure will be limited to the government and the opposition, to the exclusion of minor parties and the public.
Asked by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation 4 times whether a group accusing Israel of genocide could be designated a hate group, Federal Attorney-General Michelle Rowland ultimately said she would rely on the advice of ASIO and the police in such a case. Membership in a listed group or merely expressing support for it becomes a crime under the law, and the accused can be penalized with years in prison. The effect of the law, pushed through in just 1 week, could be similar to Britain's Terrorism Act, which has been used to proscribe the activist group Palestine Action and to arrest anyone who merely expresses support for it. As The Guardian's Australian edition reported, criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu may be an offence under Australia's new hate speech laws. The Combating Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremism Bill 2026 does not require proof of the intent of the accused to commit a crime. It is sufficient that a member or members of the alleged targeted group has felt offended by the words or actions of the accused.
While Australians can denounce someone to the police under this law for making them feel unsafe because of some utterance, they cannot denounce anyone for supporting the commission of genocide, described by one Australian writer as the mother of all hate crimes. The bill was rushed through by the Labor government, which sent this complex bill to Parliament on January 13th, 1 month after the December 14th Bondi terrorist attack, and gave Parliament exactly 1 week to get it passed. It allowed only 48 hours for public submissions on the 144-page bill. Joining us to discuss the passage of this troubling new law and its grave implications are Senator David Shoebridge, the Justice spokesperson for the Australian Greens, who delivered an impassioned speech against the bill on the Senate floor Tuesday night, and Nasser Mashni from the Australian Palestine Advocacy Network, which has challenged statements from Susan Ley, the leader of the opposition, which have disturbingly drawn a causal link between anti-genocide marches and the Bondi Beach terror attacks. Senator Shoebridge, as you have said, it's been an interesting week in Australian politics. In great haste, we have introduced a raft of new laws detailed in the Combating Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremism Bill, which encompass criminal and migration laws. Parliament has created new federal hate speech offences, increased hate crime penalties, targeted hate preachers, established prohibited hate group listings, expanded visa cancellation powers for designated extremists, and introduced firearm amendments, including a new national buyback plan. There seems to be a relative consensus on gun and border control to impede acts of terrorism, but utter confusion on what might constitute a hate crime and who might be targeted as a leader, member, or even an informal member of a so-called hate group. Concern is mounting within the Australian community because penalties are severe, and it would appear that they can be applied retrospectively. You, Senator Shoebridge, have said coalition amendments to the bill will mean you can get caught up in these laws for ridicule or criticism without any connection to physical violence. Can you take us through this minefield of prohibitions and inform us on what might still be protected political speech in Australia. I refer in particular to the rejection of Senator Lydia Thorpe's proposed amendment, defeated 43-12, to include the federal court judgment in Wertheim versus Haddad, whereby criticism of the practices, policies, and acts of the State of Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, or Zionism is not inherently criticism of Jewish people and is protected political speech and not hate speech. Our Attorney General has been clear as mud on speech about Israel and the Palestine genocide. What is really going on here?
Well, I wish I could give you a neat answer about the kinds of speech that is going to be covered by this bill, but the truth of the matter is there were a raft of it. Well, first of all, we only saw the first draft of this bill, which included even more aggressive vilification offence as well, Tuesday night of last week. You know, we had less than a week with it before it was introduced into Parliament. It went to us a stitch-up committee, which is populated only by Labor and Coalition MPs, designed expressly to exclude the crossbench, especially the Greens. The community had 48 hours to make submissions on it, and largely what the community said was, in their thousands, dangerous, reckless, how dare you do this, how dare you not put it out for proper scrutiny. That's what the community said, that's what the legal experts said. But then, once we thought it had kind of largely been killed off by that almost uniform response from across civil society, there were a small number of groups, largely the sort of pro-Israel lobby, some Jewish groups collective groups that supported it. There were also some politicians who were supporting it. And there was obviously the Labor Party supporting it. But civil society, lawyers, activists more broadly, ordinary people in the street were deeply troubled by what was happening. And, and of course, I want to commend groups like the Jewish Council and other progressive voices from within that community here who are also, appalled by what was being proposed. So then in the last 24 hours, before it came onto a vote, starting on Monday morning, the coalition indicated that they would support large chunks of it, but only if they got a bunch of amends. And the amendments that they achieved in the last 24 hours made it worse, extended the reach of it, lowered the threshold of it, expanded the scope of the prohibition and banning powers. And to a point now that literally on Tuesday afternoon, when we saw the draft that had been negotiated between the Liberal Party the coalition and the Labor Party, we had a number of very senior lawyers, including senior counsel. We showed them the draft bill. We took them through the changes. We took them through the key elements. And we said, well, so what conduct is going to be covered by this? And they said, well, we cannot tell you. All we can tell you is that there's a massive expansion of the scope. And I'll give you one example. The coalition negotiated to bring into the bill the threshold for hate crimes, which would lead to the criminal banning of groups, the criminalising of being a member of the group, as you pointed out, including an informal member. They roped in 7 different state and territory laws that already criminalise some form of hate speech or vilification. 7 different laws got roped in a single clause. And those laws include a threshold which is contempt or ridicule that can be criminalised, contempt or ridicule directed against a group. And of course, the 7 different laws all have 7 different tests for what amounts to a hate crime and or a vilification under the different states and territories. So we said to the lawyers, well, does this mean there's going to be a different test in Victoria under the Victorian test than there will be in New South Wales under the New South Wales test? And what about those states and territories like Tasmania that don't have an equivalent law? And they said, well, we can't tell you because the drafting is so confused. The drafting either says those 7 tests all apply all across the country and any one of them can lead to a banning, or the drafting says there are 7 different tests all across the country and it depends where you are and what you can and can't say. Both of those create major constitutional problems, obviously, for the government, but they also leave the community asking, well, what is the threshold that's going to see me, my organisation, criminalised and been put in jail is expressing contempt for the state of Israel. Is that going to lead to being in jail? Is ridiculing the actions of Vladimir Putin going to see me put in jail? You know, expressing concerns about human rights abuses in China, is that going to see you being put in jail? It's extraordinary. But can I also say there are other parts of the test that were already in the draft law. Like, there are multiple ways you can find your conduct being criminalised: contempt, ridicule, and of course, you know, things that we would all be deeply offended by. Active threats of violent hate against groups, they would be criminalised under this law, but they would also, or you would, well, we believe also criminalised under existing powers to ban organisations under anti-terror law. So actively promoting or actively inciting violence against a group identified by race, religion, etc., is already covered under the terrorism laws and could already see your organisation banned under existing anti-terror laws. That's why groups like ISIS and others have been banned in Australia, because of their violent threats. And we do need some kind of restraints like that. We can't let those kinds of organisations operate in this country where they're directly threatening, directly inciting violence against groups in our society. So we already have those laws, and groups are already being prescribed under those laws. The threshold that's been set under this law is causing promoting an environment. You don't have to be doing it yourself, but you could creating an environment within which other groups may promote hate, and the hate can be in the form of economic, social, or psychological harm. So not physical harm, not physical threats, but economic harm. So, for example, let's think about the BDS movement.
Exactly.
Actively promoting economic harm against the interests of the Israeli businesses and the Israeli state. Well, that's actively promoting economic harm against a nationality. That would meet the test. And who interprets the test? Well, ASIO, Australia's federal secret security agency. And of course, ASIO is not a neutral body. ASIO is oversighted only by the Labor and coalition parties. They don't allow any other member of parliament to have active oversight of ASIO. It's only responsible to that political duopoly of Labor and the coalition. ASIO will provide a secret report to the Home Affairs Minister that says, well, Organisation X is creating an environment where hate in the form of economic harm is being directed against the Israeli nation because they're asking for a boycott of settlement products. They're asking for a boycott of products that have been produced by corporations that are engaged in a genocide. That's harming a nation. People in Australia who identify strongly with Israel feel psychological harm from that. There's economic harm from that. This is a hate organisation and we're going to prescribe it. The Home Affairs Minister then has to say, well, you know, is that reasonable? Well, you know, if anyone thinks Tony Burke is going to be a saviour of our civil rights, or, you know, Peter Dutton used to be the Home Affairs Minister, the Home Affairs Minister has to go to his or her mate, their fellow political traveller in the form of the Attorney-General. The Attorney-General goes, yep, sure, I'm happy with what ASIO has said. Home Affairs Minister says, I'm fine with what ASIO says. Bang, regulations are made. The group is criminalised. Being a member of the group is criminalised. Supporting the group is criminalised. Being an informal member of the group is criminalised. And we're talking, you know, penalties that range from 5 to 15 years in jail because, you know, a very plausible scenario is you are a member of a group that was calling for economic boycotts against Israel. So, you know, and if you think this is, you know, in some ways this kind of federal state major parties attack on activism, it's not new. This, you know, in the anti-apartheid movement, the federal political parties were desperately on the side of the South African government for ages, treated protesters as, you know, terribly disruptive, hated their politics. You know, at one point, I think a state premier threatened to run his car over anti-apartheid protesters because so hated them. So the boycott movement of the anti-apartheid movement that brought down that hateful regime in South Africa, under these laws, all of that, much of that movement could have been criminalised. People could have been put in jail for opposing apartheid South Africa. And just cross out apartheid South Africa now and write in Israel and the genocidal actions of the Israeli state. So, me even saying that now, the genocidal actions of the Israeli state, the criminality of Benjamin Netanyahu, pointing out that he's, there are warrants out for his arrest under the International Criminal Court, pointing out the multiple instances of war crimes and genocide. All of that is at risk at the moment because of this law.
I spoke to a member of the group Jews Against the Occupation, obviously a Jewish group that has been present at protests from October 9th at the Opera House in 2023. Now, this member has told me that this group is terribly worried about being proscribed, even though they are Jewish. It doesn't appear to make them immune from this kind of prosecution. The other point I'd like to highlight is that there seems to be a reversal of the burden of proof, that you're kind of guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. This sounds like the Inquisition, and especially with the secret deliberation and gathering of evidence about you. What can we do to turn this around, David?
Well, the only thing we can do is not give up our rights to protest, not allow this law to censor us and silence us simply by the effect of it being passed. I firmly believe that Australians at large would be horrified that people would be going to jail for calling out the genocide in Gaza. I mean, of course, there might be a small core of people who would celebrate that, but the overwhelming bulk of Australians believe that in our country, we absolutely need the right to call out and, if necessary, engage in a political discussion about international law, about fundamental human rights. And I think the worst thing we could do is let the law silence us simply by its passing. Any government that seeks to exercise these powers against groups like Jews Against the Occupation will lose its legitimacy rapidly. Now, of course, I feel absolutely conflicted in saying this because as a senator, I have certain more, at least political protections, even if I don't have any legal protections. What I say in Parliament is protected, but what I say outside of Parliament has no more protections than what the community has. But of course, simply having the office gives you certain more social and political protections than citizens who aren't in elected office. But we can't let these people silence us. And as we've seen in the United Kingdom, the exercise of these powers against, thousands of people in society who are exercising their conscience, and people can see they're exercising their conscience, rapidly delegitimizes the government. But my fear is the cost that will happen in the meantime and the chilling effect, and it's intended to have a chilling effect, the chilling effect that this law has now it's passed. There are, I'll give you just one example about how this nonsense works. In those 7 state acts that I was telling you about, state and territory acts that criminalise certain speech, each of them have defences in them, right? But a defence under these criminal laws, to run a defence, you need to be able to say, well, this is what I thought, or you need to put evidence forward. Normally defences require you to actually assert something. Let's now remember what this process involves. This process involves ASIO secretly gathering evidence about you, doing wiretaps, looking at what your comments are, and then forming a view without ever speaking to you. Because the law excludes natural justice, no procedural fairness. It expressly says you don't have to give any procedural fairness. So without ever asking you, ASIO forms a view that you've maybe broken a Victorian law. You could be living in Darwin, but formed a view that you've broken a Victorian law. That Victorian law has a defence in it. ASIO will never ask you about that defence. They're just going to assume that you don't have a defence, or maybe assume something on your behalf. They then write a secret report to the Home Affairs Minister, which you never see, making allegations you've never seen. And the Home Affairs Minister has a quick little chat with the Attorney-General and then bans you. I mean, the extraordinary nature of this and the harm that you could have been alleged to be promoting, economic harm, or psychosocial harm. Politics can be rough sometimes, right? I don't believe people have a right to be an endless bigot, right? I don't believe you can just pick on vulnerable parts of our community and monster them at will. But we need to be able to have robust political discussions. We need to be able to debate a genocide. We need to be able to debate, the appalling behaviour towards First Nations peoples in Australia. Arguably, that could be criminalised under these laws. If someone said that was anti-Australian, offends the nationality of Australians by pointing out the genocide and the violence against First Nations people, of course we should put bounds on speech where they are inciting violence against people, actively calling out violence, or encouraging others to engage in violence. That is a reasonable place to put bounds on free speech. But this bill puts it nowhere near that point. You don't have to be promoting violence. You don't have to be intending violence. You don't even have to be intending economic harm. But if what you do creates an environment where somebody else is encouraging economic harm against another nation, whack, you could find yourself banned
or deported
and facing major criminal penalties, and you've never even been asked.
Right.
Senator, the Attorney General on ABC was asked repeatedly whether a group that calls Israel a nation that commits genocide, would they be banned? She refused to answer. Eventually, she said it would be up to the police and the Home Affairs Minister to decide. And she also would not, the interviewer said that the citizens should know in advance what a crime is. So if, for our benefit, our American audience, this kind of bill probably could never pass in the U.S., or if it did, it would be challenged in court. Why? Because of the First Amendment, clearly. Second, the Fifth Amendment, which claims that people need to know what a law is before that. And also, there's an article in the Constitution which specifically bans retroactive or ex post facto laws. This law, if you said something in 1975, or as a youth, you said something in your indiscretion against Israel or whatever, they could drag you into court now for something you said. My question is, if you can comment on some of those aspects of that, but also, can this be challenged in the High Court as unconstitutional? The Australian High Court.
So there are elements of this that raise very real constitutional issues. I think I spoke before about trying to rope in state and territory laws. I think there are real issues if the Commonwealth is trying to apply unequal laws across the country. There are equal problems if they're trying to rope in state and territory laws that are designed for one jurisdiction and applied across the whole country. That creates problems. We have very few fundamental rights in this country. But the High Court has said that the Constitution is framed around having free and open political debate. And they've said that there are limits on what any state and territory government can do to restrict political expression and freedom of political expression. They say that those limits have to be proportional and reasonable and linked to a legitimate outcome, basically. I think absolutely there are real questions about whether these series of opaque, hard to understand, hard to comprehend, incredibly broad bases upon which to criminalise association and criminalise speech. I think there are real questions about whether or not that's constitutional. But I don't think we should tie all our hopes to a constitutional challenge. Because as I said, we, unlike other nations, don't have strong constitutional protections. Our protection against legislation like this is society resisting it and expressing collectively that there is no legitimacy to these laws and there's no legitimacy to the actions the government takes under these laws. And, the unfortunate thing about this legislation, Joe, is, we've spent the better part of 20 minutes talking about it. We've raised, I can't tell you how many issues with it. We could spend the next hour and a half raising more issues with it. It includes retrospectivity, right? It can pick up any conduct that you've done before the law passes and use that as a reason to criminalise your organisation. It's designed to apply only to race, ethnicity and nationality. That was a deliberate and conscious decision from the government, and they've said it very clearly that they want to address anti-Semitism, they want to address attacks against the Jewish religion, and they don't want to protect any other religion. And that test, race, ethnicity and nationality, has been interpreted by the courts to include Judaism because it's linked to nationality and ethnicity. But if you're Islamic, zero protections. Islamophobia is not touched under this. If you have a member of any other religion, you're not protected under this. And that was a conscious, divisive, intentional act on behalf of the government. So where do we go forward? Well, we go forward, I think I've said it before, you don't really have a choice when you've got governments trying to say you can't call out a genocide. And the Attorney-General, who I might say, when she says it's a matter for ASIO and a matter for the Home Affairs Minister, she obviously hasn't read the legislation herself. because she has to approve the banning and prescription of any organisation. She actually has a role in it. And so her sitting there on national television saying, well, is this going to lead to the targeting of groups who call out a genocide in Israel? And she says, oh, it's not a matter for me, Gov. It's a matter for ASIO and Home Affairs. It is actually a matter for the Attorney-General. And if she doesn't have a view about whether or not criticising Netanyahu and Israel is going to lead to you being banned, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. But I think we should be very anxious and mindful. I know you're going to be speaking with NASA and APAN afterwards. I don't think we should pretend this is politically neutral laws. It is actually designed to criminalise legitimate criticism of the state of Israel. It's focused on that. It'll be weaponised in that space, is my expectation. It's definitely open to being weaponised in that space. And of course, once they get a taste for it, right? Once the duopoly that feel their, the Labor and the Liberal Party, who feel their control of federal politics is sort of slipping out of their hands, their traditional monopoly of power, once they get a taste for banning organisations in this space, where does it end? Where does it end? It's a time for deep anxiety in Australia's democracy now, and it's a time to fight for it.
Very good. Thank you. A quick comment on the collapse of the coalition. This has led to the Nationals peeling off from the Liberal coalition.
Yeah, well, I mean, a broken clock can be right twice a day, right? And there are parts of the National Party in particular who see that these extraordinary broad banning powers are just bad for democracy. Now, I think probably some of the reasons they would want to oppose this are different to ours. We want to protect people fighting for human rights, fighting against the genocide, expressing solidarity with freedom movements around the world and in Australia. I think they may have other groups that they want to protect, and I they probably don't accord with my view about who should be protected. But we live in a democracy, and you don't have to appreciate somebody else's politics to say that you should be able to express them, provided you're not inciting violence, provided you're not advocating violence, provided you're not engaging in gross vilification of other groups. I believe we answer most political issues not by putting our opponents in jail, but by bettering their arguments and by joining together collective movements to win the argument. You don't, and you shouldn't, be focused on winning your politics by putting your opponents in jail.
David, thank you very much. And there's just one thing I'd like to slip in, but you don't have to comment on it. So Senator Thorpe, in her speech in the Senate, mentioned a figure, and she said that there had been a rise of 2,297% in Victoria in 2025 of Islamophobic incidents. So it is obvious that to exclude certain communities is a serious oversight. They all need protection.
Yeah. Well, I've said repeatedly from the moment we saw the first draft of this law that it is inherently divisive to bring legislation in to deal with hate crimes and to only protect one religion. I mean, of course, we should be deeply concerned about anti-Semitism. And if laws are going to be protecting groups from hateful speech, well, then of course it should cover anti-Semitism. But the fact that it is intended only to cover anti-Semitism, expressly to exclude the rise in Islamophobia, not cover other vulnerable groups like the queer community, the LGBTIQ plus community, not cover some of the hateful things that have been said about women at the moment and protect gender, that is inherently divisive laws. And to think that you can bring in hate crimes and have at the heart of them, at the very center of them, this kind of divisive structure so that it only covers one religion, I think is deeply, deeply unprincipled on behalf of the government. And I think it's created an environment where people from the very outset saw this as a targeted political attack. And the speeches that we heard in Parliament, I think from both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party only confirm that.
Please, one more about genocide. Genocide is not in the law, and the Liberals say that it's already covered by existing law. Do you agree with that? Why isn't it not in the law?
I can't explain, Joe, why this legislation is so appallingly drafted, other than to say this was one of the worst parliamentary processes you could imagine. Rushed laws created from a very partisan start, from a government that's felt for the better part of 2 years now that it's been getting unfair criticism because of their failure to stand up against the genocide in Gaza. Their so-called political opponents, who actually, really in many ways they're just two sides of the one coin, then joining together to criminalize a movement that has been criticizing both of them for failing to stand up to a genocide. That's how you get laws like this. You get laws like this by people in power losing their grip on power, responding with repressive, nasty, criminal responses to their opponents. This isn't the first time we've seen it, and we need to resist it.
It seems like in a very dark moment in Australia's history, and that there's a pall over the country after this law was passed. That's my view.
Joe Kelly, I'm sorry, I've got to
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, good speaking. Bye.
Thank you, David. I'd like to welcome Nasser Mashni to the program. Nasser is the head of APAN, the Australian Palestine Advocacy Network. Nasser, on the 20th of January, you wrote a letter to the leader of the opposition, Susan Ley, your organisation did, and I would just first of all like to share that with our audience. I'd like to read some of it, if you don't mind, so people get a grip on what she has said and what APAN is asking for. So APAN writes, "Dear Miss Ley, Australia Palestine Advocacy Network, APAN, writes in response to your remarks in Parliament in which you claimed that anti-Semitism in Australia, quote, walked our streets, marched over our bridges and camped in university quadrangles. Those statements were indefensible and dangerous. You did not merely speak imprecisely. You used the authority of your office to cast peaceful protesters as carriers of anti-Semitism. You did so deliberately by imagery and association from the floor of Parliament, fully aware of the power your words carry and the harm they would cause. That accusation is false, it is reckless, and it should never have been made. The March for Humanity over the Sydney Harbour Bridge was a peaceful, lawful, mass protest calling for the protection of civilians and respect for human rights. It did not promote anti-Semitism, it did not incite hatred, it did not threaten Jewish Australians. To suggest otherwise is to knowingly distort reality. You placed that protest and others like it in the same narrative frame as graffiti, fire bombings and attacks on places of worship. That is not careless rhetoric. It is attribution. It assigns collective blame to protesters and movements that have engaged in lawful democratic expression, and it is wrong." I'm just going to skip to the end because there's quite a deal more. "We therefore urgently call on you to withdraw your remarks, correct the public record, and cease using language that falsely associates peaceful protest and Palestinian advocacy with criminal anti-Semitism." Have you had any response from Susan Ley, leader of the opposition?
No, deathly silence, Kathleen, deathly silence. And sometimes in a moment you compose a letter or a tweet or whatever it might be, and thoughts and passion and thinking run wild. But, and rarely does something get read back to you so that you can actually get the full value and power of those words. But she absolutely dog whistled violence against us, I believe. And if she had not said that with parliamentary privilege, we would be taking action. And those words, we've got to be very clear. Anti-Semitic hate fueled the terrorists on December 14, but it came out of the shadows in 2023. It walked our streets, it marched over our bridges, it took over our landmarks, it camped in university quadrangles. Like a slow creeping disease, it festered in plain sight. This is the language of the Third Reich when they spoke about Jews. This language speaks to a sliver of far-right extremism, which is sadly growing in this country, sadly growing, and it's being fed by this sort of narrative, but it's also being amplified by people like Premier Minns, who has single-handedly, I believe, destroyed social cohesion in this country, is a word that I never even knew existed on October 6th. In their determination to elevate one section of Australia over the rest. 27 million people in this continent aren't Jewish. Not Jewish. The horrors of Bondi, the horrors of Bondi have to be addressed as a whole of community thing. All of us have to come together. We all need to mourn together. To exclude us, the pro-Palestine movement, the anti-genocide movement, the humanitarian movement, from that space, to other us in such an undignifying way, to use that sort of creeping disease. My goodness, it's just dehumanizing to a level. And I can tell you, having spent my entire life in the Palestine space, some of my nearest and dearest friends are Jews. Nearest and dearest friends. Now, you know who has a concern with us is Jewish supremacists, Jewish Zionists. They have a problem with us because their ideology and their belief is supremacy. And that supremacy, we've seen how it manifests itself, not only in the Nakba that saw my father thrown out of his home and end up in Australia, but we've seen what Zionism is in 4K in Gaza. All of the horrors we hear about globally about past wars and, the Holocaust were, diaries perhaps, or, a British general, conquering parts of Africa and stumbling upon magnificent waterfalls and saying, this is beautiful. I'm going to name it Victoria Falls. I'm going to name these waterfalls Victoria Falls. They're all just diaries of conquering generals. But this is the first time we've had video footage of a genocide. And all that didn't matter to social cohesion. Nobody's lighting up a building for Australian Palestinians and their allies. Over and above which cohesion, we're going to invite the president of that state plausibly committing genocide according to International Court of Justice, but actually committing genocide according to Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights organization, and every leading human genocide scholar globally, etc. That we're going to invite that head of state here, a guy who said there's no such thing as an innocent person in Gaza, a guy who signed bombs to be dropped on innocent Palestinian men, women, and children. I mean, who signs bombs? What sort of brain are you? You're signing bombs for a photo op. That we're inviting that guy here to our country to mourn Australian deaths. They're Australians and they're Jewish. They're not Israeli. Where's our opportunity to mourn in that space? Where's our opportunity to be part of the healing? Where's our opportunity? I mean, we fully could have been on Bondi Beach that day. Where's any sense that how we might feel that a guy signs bombs dropped on my family is welcomed here, is going to get a state visit? We have been othered. We were othered on October 6th, and we had no opportunity to express ourselves. Nobody, find a way to belong, love it or leave, and all those euphemisms that the crazy right spits out. And then here we are today where we're rushing through laws where we're going to put you in jail, NASA. You made somebody feel unsafe. Take a 15-year holiday. And the guy who signed bombs that killed your family, he's coming here. He's going to get all the pomp and ceremony of a visiting dignitary. It's shameful. It's disgusting.
It is. And we had Michelle Burkon from Jews Against the Occupation on just after the incident happened at Bondi. And she went the following day. I don't know, she got into the news because she was wearing a keffiyeh and was allegedly inciting violence against herself and dragged off. But she said that she had spoken to lots of Jewish people and they felt alienated. They felt that they had gone there and then they had walked away again, to pay their respect. But the flowers were covered in Israeli flags and everywhere that people were wearing the Israeli flag, which was rather strange in Australia. But the whole event or the whole space seemed to have been hijacked by people who wanted to express nationalism towards Israel. And so they walked away. They felt that they could not pay their respects. And she spoke to a lot of people who felt that way about it. So when Jewish people themselves are being excluded because of this nationalism that is being expressed, I mean, it's pretty bad. And also, as I said to Senator Shoebridge, this very group has real fears about running foul of these new laws. So I just wanted to get your response, and if you've talked to other people about their response to these new laws, and how do you think they tie in with the visit of President Herzog to Australia?
Well, a few things. First, to Michelle and her community, I've also heard so many things. Look, it's a disgusting conflation, and we should be very clear. Benjamin Netanyahu and Zionists have been the ones that have been so heavy in doing it, criticizing Israel, criticizing Zionism, is criticizing Judaism. That's a shameful conflation, shameful conflation. Zionism is a political ideology. Most Zionists aren't even Jews. Most Zionists aren't even Jews. Israel is some geography. It's a bit of dirt. And Judaism is an Abrahamic faith, thousands of years old. The conflation of that is shameful. And it has led to stupendous amounts of anti-Semitism because people who don't have nuance blame Jews for Israeli crimes. I talked earlier on about, there hasn't been anyone in the global north and perhaps even the south that doesn't have an iPhone or a Google phone that hasn't seen the images, of a father holding body parts of his children in a bag, screaming, what did these children do? What did these children do? People of Earth, what did these children do? That was from October of 2023, 850 days ago. That conflation, that evil conflation, is disgusting. And ISIS doesn't need that to do Bondi. ISIS was doing this in Syria and Iraq to Yazidis, to Kurds, to Christians because of their sick ideology. More Palestinians and more Muslims have been killed than Jews, let alone Australians, let alone needing to bring the head of a genocidal apartheid racist state here to mourn as if these people aren't Australian. I mean, it's anti-Semitic. It's anti-Semitic to suggest that these people aren't Australian. And then to say, to adorn all of those, the flowers, etc., draped in an Israeli flag is to create that conflation. It furthers the connection between the crimes and Judaism, which we're very explicit about, very explicit at every rally, at every function. We talk very clearly about the fight for a free Palestine is an intersectional struggle against all hate. And however that hate manifests itself, whether it's anti-Semitism or homophobia, hate against Indigenous folk, black folk, xenophobia, whatever it might be, misogyny, patriarchy, it's a fight against all that. And what we've got is a government that has, abrogated its responsibility to lead by ceding to these lobby groups and elevating one group above all the rest. And I've had this argument countless times over decades to Zionists. The people that are coming to get Jews, quote unquote, are also coming to get black folk, brown folk, Muslim folk, Chinese folk. How dare that woman not be at home breeding and cooking? She's taking a job of one of our men. They hate all of us, and the fight against hate is best met and tackled when we're united against hate. It's not elevating you. It's not saying out of 27 odd million people that 100,000 Australian Jews need special rules and special laws. And what that's saying to the other 27 million people, are you inadvertently feeding into a narrative of, extra power or media control, and in fact reinforcing nasty anti-Semitic stereotypes? And then, as with all that going on, to then draw a straight line, as Premier Minns has done and continues to do, disgustingly, shamefully, is to say that the marches on Bondi, the marches on the bridge, that it's their fault. 300,000 people that said, we are sick of what's happening. We are sick of our government's inaction. We are sick of our government's complicity. We are sick to death. Do something. Do something. It's not your job to turn off the light on genocide, turn off the power on genocide, but it's your job to do everything you can to make sure we're not powering the genocide, and you're not doing enough. To draw a line between those 300,000 people, overwhelming majority, not Muslim, overwhelming majority, not Palestinian, to draw a line from them to these two nutters, anti-Semitic, racist scumbags that committed this massacre. To draw that line is a disgusting abrogation of his responsibility as a leader and a complete and utter pandering to a section of our community that has the interests of its own group, Australian Zionists, above Australia and above humanity, I'd argue.
Yes. Joe, do you have a question for Nasser?
Yes, Nessa, thank you for joining us. And let's face it, we get back to this law that was passed. And what the purpose is clearly one thing I think you'll agree that it's to stop these protests against a genocide, to shield, to protect the Israeli government so that they can continue to commit genocide, and also shield the Australian government and of course the United States government above all else, and Germany and so many Western governments from actively participating in the genocide and being complicit in the genocide. So this law is that, in your view, the purpose of this law to
There's,
vilify, talk about vilification, to vilify the protest against genocide so that it can continue.
yeah, there's no question, Joe. There's no question these laws, as hastily written as they were, as poorly documented and argued, and Senator Shoebridge was very articulate in discussing the real challenges with it. But there's no question these laws further feed into this special category hate, of elevating, exceptionalizing anti-Semitism above all hate. And in a colony with the crimes that have been committed historically, that are continuing to be committed against First Nations people, to not address that, to not speak to that, to not speak to the femicide that occurs in this country. The 1 in 4 women, every 4 days, a woman will be killed at the hands of her partner. That we need special laws that say that if you are against genocide, if you are against the country participating in genocide, supporting genocide, militarily, diplomatically, in the media, financially, that you are part of the problem. That is disgusting overreach. And we should be very clear. I've no doubt these laws were written by and were informed by Gillian Siegel and her cohort of anti-Palestinian racists who have sought to other and demonize and silence my community, the Australian Palestinian community, but also our constituency, which includes all of our allies. And having failed in being able to convince the public opinion that Israel is right, the image that Israel enjoyed globally on October 6th. It's a plucky little democracy in a sea of angry brown people that, look at us, we're at Eurovision and, we've got gay rights and the beaches in Tel Aviv and have some Israeli couscous. And Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman, she's Israeli. That image they had curated in the West, we're just like every other country, like Sweden and Norway, France, Germany. Don't look at us, everything's okay. That was all shattered because citizen journalists had their phones and started taking pictures and uploading it, and social media platforms exploded and they couldn't get to the algorithms quick enough for people to see. And so Zionism globally is endeavoring to rehabilitate Israel, rehabilitate Zionism as an ideology, and have realized that they can't. You can't unsee those images. Now, what does that mean globally, and more so in an Australian context, is might not get 300,000 people to a bridge tomorrow, or 50,000 in the streets of Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane or wherever it might be. But that doesn't mean those people have bought back into the lie that was Israel. Everything my father told me and the generations of Nakba survivors told us, everyone on earth has seen in 4K. That general that wrote the story of discovering Victoria Falls, Captain Cook's diaries, they were all just diary notes and stories. People have seen what Israel, what Zionism is in 4K. We have those images. We have the images of Israeli soldiers blowing up hospitals and dedicating it to their fiancés. We've got pictures and videos of soldiers prancing about in women's lingerie and defacing school fields and torturing Palestinians. We've seen Israeli ministers go to a prison, lead a rally and a demonstration for the right to rape Palestinian prisoners. We've seen it all. Everyone's seen it. And they've seen the image of a dad holding his two children in plastic bags, what body parts he could recover after an explosion. And knowing that they can't rehabilitate it, knowing how hard it is going to be to try and recapture that normal space, what they want to do is have us stop talking, stop petitioning, stop protesting. And the way to do that is to criminalize us. I think they're going to have to get some very big jails because we're not going to stop.
Well, Nasser, I have two questions. I was going to ask this one second, but after what you just said, if they ban an organization, I think Palestine Action, it's called here in Australia as well, different from the one in Britain, that organized the 300,000 strong march across. If they ban that, will they be able to then arrest everyone who's on that bridge? I mean, they physically cannot do that. Would everyone, the 300,000 people, be liable to arrest under this law?
I think so. The law is so poorly written and so broad, incite fear. You know, my kid went to work just now and he said, "See you, Dad, like I'm fearful that, he'll be in a, God forbid, a traffic accident." I mean, instill fear. I mean, incite. I mean, there should be no room and we should give no space for somebody saying, an organization or a human being with a platform to say, "Go get them," whoever them might be, queer folk, black folk, Jewish folk, Muslim folk, whatever, of course. But, somebody saying, "I'm anti-genocide, I'm anti my taxpayer money being used to purchase weapons from a weapons manufacturer that killed an Australian citizen like Elbit Systems. I'm against my taxpayer money being part of a military supply chain that is part of the F-35 program." And on that, just very quickly, because a lot of people don't really understand the entirety of what's happened in Gaza, that genocide, the overwhelming majority of that destruction happened because of F-35s. It happened because of F-35s. And our Foreign Minister Penny Wong says Australia doesn't send non-lethal parts to Israel, sends non-lethal parts to Israel in the F-35 program. Our parts are the actuators on the bomb bay doors. So if the bomb bay doors don't open, the bombs don't drop. So, F-35s don't have ashtrays. There's nobody in there having a cigarette whilst they're dropping these 1-ton bombs onto innocent men, women, and children. But these laws are absolutely to stifle criticism, absolutely to shut us up, because the Israel lobby, the Zionist lobby, has realized they have lost the masses and the silence they have. And I imagine how that's manifesting itself globally today, because the protest movement is a global movement, is that there will be spaces where people in procurements are thinking about putting something on. I told this story recently somewhere else, where it might be the Commonwealth Bank of Australia is putting in a new security platform, and the head of procurements and operations goes to tender and they get a quote from the Taiwanese, and they get a quote from the Singaporeans, and they get a quote from the Israelis. And these are three techie type countries, and the CEO is watching a presentation with his board, her board, from operations and procurement people. And they go, we've got this Singaporean company, we've got this Taiwanese company, we've got this Israeli company, and here's where their quotes differ. And the board is saying, tell me more about Taiwan and Singapore. Not saying no to the Israeli, but they're just, do we need, quote unquote, that crap? Yeah. And what they do want to stop is us talking about it. They do want us to stop talking about the crimes, to stop talking about boycotts, to stop talking about divestment and sanctions. But we won't. This is a moment of humanity that we all need to come together on, because the movement for Palestine, the global movement for Palestine, has invoked something in all of us. It's seen a connection with what's happening there to the struggles they might have. And if we can't win in Palestine, well, we're not going to win on environment. We're not going to win in any of the other fights that we need to have.
It seems to me the response to this law should be to get 600,000 people to cross the bridge and let them try to arrest everyone. I mean, really create a logistical nightmare for them. But I want to ask you about it's a bit involved, this question, and I want your thoughts on this, because it's not clear to a lot of people what exactly is going on. I'm talking about the dynamic between Zionist lobbies in Western countries and Western governments and media and other and civil society. For example, the United States is well known. AIPAC is a large Zionist lobby, and it has enormous impact on the future of politicians, whether they can run unopposed in elections. They will back up an opponent to the hilt and try to destroy your career if you don't support Israel unequivocally. And we saw the Zionist Federation here has an enormous power as well inside Australia. What is going on here? How could these groups that are now uh, they are defending a genocide, and how could they have this kind of influence over a government like in Australia or in the United States or in Britain, where they destroyed Jeremy Corbyn's campaign? When I thought that there was a line someday. I mean, they always got away with cast lead and all the other attacks on Gaza that killed 1,500, 2,000 Palestinians. We thought was absolutely horrible, and it was at the time. And that they excuse that as that's not a war crime, that's just the excesses of war. But now I thought there would have to be a line that it would be too far even for Joe Biden or for Anthony Albanese. And it isn't. It hasn't been too far. Can you explain why?
Look, I I'm a human being. I can't explain how any human being can kill another human being, let alone for resources, land, etc. This concept of supremacy to that level where you can hate somebody enough to call them human animals, that you can invoke Old Testament stories like Amalek. But then when you think about it globally, what does that look like globally? I've met Anthony Albanese a number of times. He told me in a meeting, I'm the most pro-Palestinian prime minister you've ever had. And I said to him, I agree, Prime Minister, you are the most pro-Palestinian prime minister we've ever had. But that pool is very shallow. That pool is very shallow. Um, why? When I think about Australia and, foundationally this country, terra nullius, no people here, land without people, like Zionism, a land without people for a people without land. There are a lot of similarities. Benjamin Netanyahu came about 15 years ago to Australia. Malcolm Turnbull was the Prime Minister at the time, maybe 12 years ago. And, in this warm embrace, they were, Australia and Israel share so many things together. We're, thriving democracies, and we're young countries built with belief in democracy and, rights. And, well, we're both young countries built on the dispossession of indigenous people and their theft of their resources, murder, genocide, etc. That's the commonality. And that, when another settler colony sees our settler colony being attacked by its indigenous folk, the reflex, like shooing away a fly, is to jump to its defense. And then you say, how can a guy who's so very pro-Palestinian, go from the speeches and the speeches he said in parliaments, the rallies he attended, and the speeches he said at those, where he courted our community for votes for so long, to where we are today? The first act of our Australian Parliament was the White Australia policy, and it was about the yellow peril, to keep Asians out of this country. It's foundationally racist. Australia, and military powers, etc., is very, very fearful that China is coming, and doesn't want to stray too far away from the US and AUKUS and etc. That's part of it. I think also we often don't talk about the Venn diagram that is Zionism, white supremacy, predator capitalism. And there's almost a singularity around those three things. And they manifest themselves in the business world, yeah. And they manifest themselves in advertising dollars. They advertise themselves they manifest themselves in, the junket tours, the Rambam tours, the editors that get taken onto tours. And also, why there's a rise in, this alternative media, because people have realized that, our media isn't actually news. They are private companies with a responsibility to the shareholder to deliver profit. And how do you get profit? You need the shock jocks, and you need the TV presenter to say, coming up after this break, stay tuned for, so they can sell advertising space. And then the next thing you know, you get somebody like James Packer, signing a statement saying we need a royal commission. The guy's a next door neighbor of Benjamin Netanyahu in Tel Aviv. Like, what the hell? Or Dawn Fraser, we can't have a voice to parliament. Or, so many other arguably, different layers of no consequence to has-been to quote unquote titans of business who, took advantage of JobKeeper and JobSeeker, have been perhaps stealing wages, but no royal commission into any of that stuff. So there's be proximate to America because we're scared of China. There's the media. Look, anyone that might suggest that suddenly 1,000 jurists wrote in saying we need a royal commission, and then there was 200 business people, and then there was 200 sports people, and then 50 business people, and you couldn't open a newspaper, particularly the Australian, it's not the Australian, I call it, and not read and not continue to read, some just really bile. There is no other word for it. And think that this was all organic. I mean, it's just beggars belief. And there are no question people who intersect with Zionism who are actually anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic, I mean, I think the biggest example of that is, Viktor Orban in Hungary, who's actually an anti-Semite. Guy
Big friend of Netanyahu's, by the way.
Huge
big friends. Yeah.
Huge friend, Michelle Le Pen,
she's Islamophobic. I interviewed Michelle Le Pen. She loves Israel.
Yeah.
She's not anti-Semitic like her father was.
No.
Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen has changed from her father's anti-Jewish sentiment to anti-Muslim. There's no question about that. I interviewed her for 1 hour.
Only recently.
In the last 10 years or so. Yeah.
That's recent for us old dudes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, 2016, saying, you Jews are going to vote for me because I'm good for good for you, I'll lower taxes and you'll make more money. Like, these people are anti-Semitic. They're
Yeah.
anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Yet increasingly, Bolsonaro in Brazil, before when he was president there, increasingly they are sharing space with the people that hate them, but they also see in Israel racial supremacy, which
Yeah.
is what they want. And
Exactly.
so, we're okay with it. Maybe you guys should all go there. Um, don't stop your advertising dollars. And unfortunately, unfortunately, mainstream media has become so thin. The spaces that Bob and Barb from the Burbs can go get news.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they don't have a
So,
genuine curiosity, they're not seeking out shows like yours. They're not doing independent,
right.
actually digging to find, original source documentation or hearing from people who have lived experience or academic credentials. They'll just
Yeah.
buy into anything.
Yeah, what you said about Albanese, when you look at somebody like, of course, Netanyahu and the President Herzog, and even in Australia, Julian Siegel, the envoy for anti-Semitism, or Susan Ley, the head of the opposition, these people are monsters. But Albanese is not a monster because he knows the Palestinian story. He knows better. That's why, doesn't he? I'm asking you. That's why he seems to have a pained look on his face whenever he's dealing. He didn't want to do the Royal Commission into Bondi. He looks very conflicted. Where somebody like Chris Mims, for example, the New South Wales Premier, I don't think he knows the first thing about the Palestinian story. Albanese does. You've met him. You spoke to him. Does he know fully what happened in 48? Does he know the Nakba? He knows the Nakba. He knows this is genocide. But his political career he puts ahead of doing the right thing and courage and being a statesman. Isn't that right?
There's no question that's right. And I would argue, following the 25 election, with a supermajority, he had the opportunity. He has the opportunity, still has the opportunity, to be a statesman. He still has it. He's not going to not be prime minister in 28, with the majority of, and particularly with the coalition where it is. And this morning, David Littleproud has resigned the Nationals from the coalition. There is no quote unquote opposition.
Right.
So he'll be prime minister for as long as he wants to be prime minister. But what he needs to do is lead. And when war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu said Bondi happened because you recognized Palestine, Elbow should have leaned in and said, it didn't. At least I'm not a war criminal.
Mm.
It should have just straight up slapped him. And Australia would have gone, yeah. Like, Australians would have gone, you know, don't throw stones at a glass house. I mean, Netanyahu is reviled globally, and it would have been a free kick for him to do so. Um, the fact that, look, perhaps you can see it that I can't see it. I think, unfortunately, leaders the world over no longer lead. They want to be in power, and being in power is different to leadership because you lose leadership by using political capital to do things that are unpopular, but you move the country or you move your community. If you're just riding the polls, then you don't actually advance the community or the country because you're just talking to 40 people are left, 40 people are right. There's 20 people in the middle. I just need 11 of them. And if you're just talking to those 11 people, you don't advance society or a country as opposed to saying, right, we need to have universal health coverage. Right. Everybody gets a tertiary education for free. Right. Women get no fault divorce. Right. There'll be no discrimination in our workplace or etc. Big statements as we had with Gough Whitlam in the 70s. And put the flag out there and say, now follow me. That's leadership. And in doing that, you upset people, but you move the country. Instead, what we've got is people who want to be in power. And how do you stay in power? You try and be everybody's friend, and
Not the friend of all the people who are going to jail.
No, he won't be our friend. I,
That
I,
could
I,
tarnish his legacy.
I, look, and I really think that this stuff is feeding into anti-Semitism. Like just
Yes.
not within our movement, because people who come to the rally, they understand, they get it. I'm just talking to the layperson, never been to a rally, doesn't want get off my streets, leave your shit at home. That type of person
Yeah.
is sitting there going, by jingo, these Jews have got a lot of power, like that sort of euphemistically, they got the prime minister to they broke him. They broke him. Yeah. No
Yeah,
royal
there's
commission, no
resentment. There's obviously resentment from
yeah.
the other communities, especially our First Nations people who,
Oh,
once again, I refer to the speech of Thorpe that hate came to our country 200 years ago.
of
And
course.
her people have been suffering ever since. And they are not particularly protected. They're not addressed by these new laws. And neither is yours.
Well, I mean,
But
neither is
plenty
ours.
others.
Yeah,
Plenty others. Yes.
neither is ours. And I continue to argue ours shouldn't be. Yeah. What we need to do is fight hate collectively. And the
Yeah.
first thing we need to do is address the root of hate in this country is uh, the racism against First Nations people. That's the first place we've got to start. And then we've got to heal as a country. And what we need to do is work out what the challenges are, where the hate is coming from, and how they're recruiting. And they're recruiting, the biggest recruiter today, I'd argue, is the income disparity and inequality that's happening for, those 60 or 80 guys that ended up in front of New South Wales Parliament saying we've got to get rid of the Jewish lobby. These blokes didn't come on a rally with us. These blokes aren't welcome in our space. We're very clear about it. These blokes are underemployed or unemployed. They're incels. They're struggling to, find a place and a meaning, perhaps a partner. And, they're paying $20 a month for somebody to shout at them. There's a reason you don't have that job. The Jews control everything. They're bringing brown people to your countries. The brown people are taking your jobs. Women are voting. Women are working instead of having your babies. We're being replaced. We need a white revolution. And, you know, we've got to we've got to cut that stuff off at the head. And it's about addressing inequality. When after COVID, JobKeeper and JobSeeker, companies like, Harvey Norman kept JobKeeper and JobSeeker, well, most of it, even though they had record profits. But there were companies like JB Hi-Fi and Mitsubishi that when we didn't need JobKeeper, we didn't go down in money. Here is the money back.
Yes.
There were companies that gave the money back. And then there were companies that kept the money, even though they made more money.
Yes.
One of those companies is owned by an Australian Zionist, and he stopped paying rent. He said, well, nobody's in the shopping centre, so I'm not going to pay rent. His business pivoted online. And so, he just needed people in a factory to pack stuff and put it into envelopes and ship it out.
Yeah.
And then the government paid the wages of those people,
Yes.
right? And so he made a
Yeah.
super extraordinary profit, made more money because of COVID, and kept the JobKeeper and didn't apologize. And then our former treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, very angry Josh Frydenberg, had advice from the ATO that said that it might be misused, didn't take that advice. That when the Labor government came in, there was words, maybe just publish the list of the companies that gave the money back so we can shop there and say thank you. And publish the names of the companies that kept the cash so we can go, you profiteered from
Yes.
taxpayer money and the $1 trillion that Josh Frydenberg left us in debt. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to choose not to go there. The Labor government went no. And then the Labor government went, we're not going to legislate to go back and get that money.
Yeah.
In fact, what we're going to legislate and create proactivity about is if you incited fear. We're going to come and get you, NASA, and anybody that was on that march on the Harbour Bridge. because it's your fault that these two blokes committed this heinous massacre. That's shameful.
Nasa, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Pleasure. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Kat.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.